All right, I'm doing a second entry on this 35BL shutter belt video, and the reason being is this particular camera belongs to a customer that opted for the stock area replacement mirror belt. So earlier I'd shown a video with this belt here that drives the mirror replaced with an aftermarket belt that I obtained through a company by the name of Pick Design. So now this camera is getting ready to be assembled, and I have assembled it with the stock Aeroflex Kevlar belt. You can see it's very new and fresh and light color in there. So that's been installed for one customer for his camera, and that was his option. Again, this is the stock replacement belt. It's about a $600 belt. Um, I noticed as I was installing it that the durometer of the uh, rubber or the material that encases the Kevlar belting uh, does seem uh, a bit less forgiving than the older original belts that I remember from 20 plus years ago. But anyway, so there is the stock belt. It's now in place. And as other side notes, it is a 48 tooth belt. So as you remember, or you might remember when I was talking about the Pick Design belts, I'd ordered both 48 and 49 tooth belts. When running the camera in that other previous video, I had the 49 tooth belt on. And I happened to notice when doing the install is that with the 49 tooth belt, I was able to install the belt without having to remove this sub carrier. And the sub carrier that this primary transmission drive sprocket is on a carrier in the camera that removes away from the midrib casting of the camera, and it isolates a number of mechanical devices that this long belt that is driven by the main camera drive motor. Uh, so it's an isolated subcarrier, and it carries a few different pulleys on it throughout the camera that run around various things here. So with the 49 tooth belt, I was actually able to do the install without having to remove this entire carrier. I was able to just slip it underneath the other belt and then properly tension the belt by loosening the two screws that allow this secondary drive on this mirror drive transmission to move. So with the 48 tooth belt, the Pick Design, the 48 tooth belt, I was not able to do that. I had to remove this entire carrier, which is what I have to do with the stock belt to sort of slip it up underneath and then bring it back into place. So I'm going to run the camera here in a moment, and again, I just did an arbitrary adjustment to leave a little bit of slack there, um, and we're going to see how this one performs in relation to what we saw in this other one, the aftermarket belt. Oh, and as an additional side note, this particular camera, when it had originally come to me with the belt blown, we had some older aftermarket belts in stock. Here is one of them here. This was not an endless belt. This was as well a spliced belt. And you can kind of see the splice there at that line a little bit. So this belt is a very hard durometer belt. Uh, and it's a harder durometer, certainly a harder durometer belt than the Pick Design belt was. The belt that I installed, which was similar to this, failed very, very quickly. I mean, the first shoot, the belt failed on the guy. This is not something that I had sourced. This is something that we had obtained years ago from another source that had sourced a number of these. So I'm guessing that some of these were installed in cameras years ago. And I don't know if it was age related or just a bad design belt in the first place. But whatever the case may be, this was not a good option. So we weren't going back to this. Again, the customer decided for his application that he wanted to pony up the extra money to go with the stock belt. But while I had the camera open, it was the ideal time to look at this other offering by Pick Design and see what it could do as well. So we're going to run the camera in a minute here, and things will be in focus then. Okay, so the camera is now running, It's running with that stock belt in place. Runs pretty stable. You can see it move around maybe just a little bit in that top third of frame. It appears to run maybe a little bit more stable than that aftermarket pick belt ran. But again, this was just an arbitrary tensioning, so it may not be exactly as loose or as snug as I had the pick belt. But I want to see how the current draw is looking here. And again, I'm not noticing anything different in sound, as even like I did with the pick belt. It's sounding like the normal guts of an Airy 35BL-3 opener. Let's see what the current draws. Okay, so here's with the stock belt. The current draw is in about the same place, maybe just a hair different. But you can see, a little bit of flutter there. Again, some of that is because this is not a high-end power supply. It's a very simple power supply, and it's certainly not as stable as something higher end or as stable as a battery pack would be. You can see there's still a little bit of flutter there. I would say less than the pick belt. And we're going to come back here. I'm going to throw the stroboscope on, cinematography electronic stroboscope, and we're going to look for mirror shutter bounce and see how that looks kind of in comparison to where that pick belt was at. Okay, so here the camera is running. We're strobing that mirror with the cinematography electronic stroboscope. And we can still see a little bit of mirror flutter there. So I really wouldn't say that is appreciably different from what we were seeing with the PIC design belt. This is normal for these cameras. They will have a little bit of flutter on that mirror shutter because, again, that belt is not tight. Everything has some movement. I mean, the camera motor up here is actually direct driving the movement. And there's a sprocket around the movement, which then drives this secondary belt, this large Kevlar belt here we're seeing in the foreground. Let's see if we can get to find focus. It's just a phone, folks. Anyway, so there is a little bit of bounce with that primary belt, and then of course into the secondary belt that then drives the mirror shutter. So it's not unusual to have a little bit of bounce happening there. So here is this camera again with the stock Airy belt, and not seeing a huge fat lot of difference from that little PIC design belt, which is 1/12 the money. There you have it.